Hello and welcome to Read All About It, the podcast where people talk about their favourite and not so favourite books. Join me, Paul Cuddihy, as I take each guest on the literary journey of their life, from their most cherished childhood read and a book they'd recommend to anyone, to the book they couldn't be paid to read again, and much more in between. So listen, enjoy, subscribe and spread the word about the Read All About It podcast. My guest in this episode is journalist Tony Connelly. Since graduating from university, Tony has worked with the Drum magazine, writing on modern marketing and the media. And for the past 2 years, he has been with the Celtic View, the official weekly magazine of Celtic Football Club. So as well as being my guest on the Read All About It podcast, Tony is also my colleague at Celtic. And over and above his work as a journalist, Tony is also an athlete par excellence, regularly taking part in marathons and half marathons. He puts the rest of the Celtic View team to shame. Tony, thanks for joining us on the Read All About It podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So obviously, when I've been asking people to come on the podcast, and obviously that love of books, that love of reading, and over the time you've been here, there's always a lot of book chat going on, as you probably expect for people who write for a living as well. But your reading habits, I know, are kind of varied between fiction and not fiction. Do you have a preference, or is just if something catches your attention, that's what you want to read?
I think it's probably just in recent years I've been more into non-fiction, like regularly into it. I think probably about 5-10 years ago, I can't remember when it was the first non-fiction book I read, and I think it was Rudy Vibra, I think his name was, How I Escaped from Auschwitz. But that was a rarity. It was mainly just novels. And then, I think the last couple of years it's been a lot more non-fiction. I'm not sure why. Maybe that stems from watching more documentaries and just wanting to learn things, or maybe that stems from living with a fiancé who's vastly more intelligent than me, and I feel I need to kind of try and keep up. But it's just, I find them just as gripping as a good novel, as long as they're well written. It does sometimes. It feels the same as reading a novel because you're that drawn into it and thinking about it.
And did you want to put that line in about your fiancé, or were you under instructions so that when she listens to it, she'll say, right, that's okay, right, you passed?
I've come to the stage now where I just have to readily admit defeat in that sense. Yeah, Erin is quite humble, but I know my place. Yeah.
Right, that's always the basis for the start of a good marriage, anyway. Now, the format of the Read All About It podcast follows the same format every week. In every episode, I just ask each of the guests the same 5 questions. And the first question for you would be your favourite book from childhood.
I think the first one that springs to mind, I don't know if this would have been the first one I read, possibly, but I think the one I'm going to go for would be Roald Dahl's George's Marvellous Medicine. I think I was probably around 8 maybe when I read that. I read quite a few Roald Dahl books. My dad got me into them, reading the Twits, the Fantastic Mr. Fox, BFG. But there's something about George's Marvellous Medicine that was just like peak Dahl. For me, it was like that mischievous nature that he has with what his characters are doing as well, and just, this young boy living with his gran and his mum and just putting together all these concoctions. I think that was something I would always do when I went round to my cousin's house, Chris. We would go round and then we would sneak away and then start doing things like that in the kitchen and sort of just playing pranks and things like that. So it always appealed to me, and the way that he also captured how kids sort of perceive things, like that unfiltered honesty that they have, as well as something that I think you can appreciate as an adult as well. Because I've gone on to read some of his short stories as well for adults. But yeah, George's Marvellous Medicine, I just loved it. The images that you would sort of conjure up in your head while reading it were just so vivid, and you think back on it and you wonder, was I watching a film, or was that just things that I pictured so clearly in my mind with the way that he wrote it?
Because I wonder if the book was to get published now, they'd have to put a wee disclaimer to say to children, please don't try this at home. Because as you say, the first thing you want to do when you get together with your cousins is raid the kitchen cupboards and start experimenting.
Yeah, it was. It speaks to you so much as a kid. For him to write that as an adult and have those thoughts that you have as a kid as well, and just the way that George looks at his gran as well. He's kind of, as he's making it up, I think I remember him thinking I'm sure he's thinking this might kill her, and the way he's just sort of thinking is, oh, I could do without sort of having a body on my hands. So it can be a bit sort of morbid and cold in a funny way as well, and just the way as well that he looks at old people in it. You know, like as much as growing up you love your gran and your papa and stuff like that. Like he does capture how, you know, as a kid. Again, that sort of unfiltered honesty, you're kind of like a bit wrinkly and smelly, and you might not want to hold your gran's hand or something as much as you love being around her and love her, and he gets that down on paper so well.
What I always find interesting, and you know, most people growing up I think would have read Roald Dahl, and you keep talking about this, the kind of authenticity and the honesty he captures in children, and that's probably the reason why he's successful, because I remember it was an interview I think with David Walliams, who kind of taken on that mantle, and Roald Dahl is his kind of literary hero. And he's been really successful, but he's successful because his books are good and they appeal to children, because they wouldn't necessarily know who he is as an adult, as an actor, as a comedy actor. So, you know, if Roald Dahl's books, you know, as an 8 or 9 year old didn't resonate with you, you would never have read it, or you would never have finished it, or never read any more of his books.
Yeah, I know, I think so. I'm not sure if that was the first one I read. I think the first one was BFG, but yeah, like you say, it just captures you, and you're just so excited, and it's such a great way to draw kids in to reading as well. And I think he does that thing that sort of Disney Pixar films do these days, you know, like Toy Story. It has humour that adults can appreciate as well as humour that kids can appreciate, and I think that's a really difficult thing to do, but he has that in all his books. And
the thing that surprised me was it was published in 1981. I just always had this thing about Roald Dahl books being published either in the 60s or early 70s, because I remember reading them when I was young. Obviously I'm now aging myself, because I was about 15 when that book came out. That surprised me. To me that's still relatively recent.
Yeah, they're timeless in that way, aren't they? And I think they're also timeless in the way that, like, maybe a lot of some of the old Disney films have, that the endings can be a bit sort of dark. You know, like George shrinks his gran to nothing, and that's her, she's gone, and then, you know, after a couple of minutes or an afternoon, I think him and his mum are just sort of like, oh well, it's not so bad, you know. It's like that's timeless, and well, maybe something you don't get is often now, but it stands the test of time as well, that it's funny and it's dark, and you're not just laughing throughout it, you're thinking about relationships in your own life as well. So it's just really clever the way that he captures that and taps into the mind of adults and kids and kind of bridges that gap.
What I like about this podcast is obviously different people have different choices, and if we go into the second question, which is your favourite book from what I've kind of called teenage student formative years, when you're starting to develop your own kind of tastes and all sorts of different things, and you couldn't have chosen a more different book from George's Marvellous Medicine as your kind of favourite book from those formative years.
Yeah, this one is a difficult one. I kept chopping and changing, but I read a bunch of his books quite close together, and that was Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I think he's a brilliant author, well, for all ages, maybe teenage upwards, but for teenagers as well. I think what he writes and the subjects that he writes and stuff like that, he has that rebellious streak through him that maybe is at the forefront of your mind when you're a teenager and you're at your formative years, so it really kind of enthralls you a lot more than maybe it would if you read it later in life. Yeah, just I remember reading that and just laughing a lot as well, and it's funny later on then realising that he actually very much was that person that he's portraying in the book. You know, he's doing it's gonzo journalism, and there's a huge ego there that you don't get with a lot of writers, and that might put me off with some, but with him, because he was so funny and out there and determined and bold, it just kind of all came together really well, and it's just this mad whirlwind adventure that he goes on, full of drunk and drugs and stuff like that. But that's maybe that kind of appeals to you as a teenager, but that's not what draws you in. It's just the way that he describes things and like the streaks of anger through some of the things that he's saying as well, that, you know, as a teenager you're going to kind of have that in you as well at that point in your life.
Because I wonder if you read it subsequently again, and did it have a different impact on you, or do you think it's just one of those books that was of its time for you at that period in your life?
I've not read it back since. I then went on to watch the film a few years afterwards, and I think I still felt the same thing. And I've went on to read some of his books later on. I've read The Rum Diary and Hell's Angels and stuff like that. And again, same sort of themes coming up, same style, because it's still him very much throughout all of them. And it still makes you feel that way. I think if I were to go back and read it now, I'd still be as drawn into it. I'd still enjoy it as much, just because he's that kind of timeless figure for me. Because he was such a brilliant writer and a genius, I'll always have that appreciation for how he wrote and what he done and how he chose to sort of cover things. And it's just the humour as well. I don't think my humour's changed too much. I don't know if it does for many people as you grow older. So I would still always appreciate, as well as the quality of his writing, the sense of humour that he has, and just the sort of streaks of like anger that he has. I'm always getting told off for having a bad temper around the house, so I think that's always in me as well, and it's something that I can connect with him.
So now your fiancé can blame Hunter S. Thompson. But when I was just checking just before we did the podcast, and I hadn't realised that the subtitle of this book is called "It's a Savage Journey into the Heart of the American Dream." So although probably people remember the kind of anarchic side of it, and you mentioned the humour, but obviously there was a serious point he was making as well.
Yeah, he did. He always got that across as well, like giving a commentary on wider society, and how he was very much taken in by the idea of the American dream and stuff like that. I remember reading some stuff about his early life, and he would write out The Great Gatsby again and again and again. And I think he was a big fan of F. Scott Fitzgerald, but I think he was writing that out to get his typing up and just to be in the rhythm of writing. But that's got subjects obviously of the American dream and the flaws of it as well. And then he's kind of taken that and applied it in a really chaotic way to modern life as well, to show that it was sort of flawed then, but the same things still exist in this day and age. And amongst all the chaos and the distractions, it might make you think that, oh no, it's more tangible than ever now, but he's kind of trying to put across the sort of moral ambiguity around all that.
And what did you think of the film adaptation with Johnny Depp?
I love the film adaptation, yeah. Johnny Depp was he not
in The Rum Diary as well? Did he?
Yeah, Johnny Depp played, they were really close friends, I think, Johnny Depp and Hunter Thompson. Right. Yeah, I think I remember reading Hunter Thompson's funeral. Johnny Depp paid for his ashes to be shot up in a rocket. I think the two of them were as mad as each other, yeah, but they were close friends throughout, so he starred in at least two of his film adaptations as well, yeah. Rum Diary was good, but I think the Fear and Loathing films, it's a cult film as well as a cult book, it was well done.
We're on now to question number 3, and this is, again, it's always the one I'm interested when people choose, so this would be a book you would recommend to anyone.
For this one, I was thinking about some non-fiction ones, but then I had to sort of take a step back and think, no, I had to recommend this to anyone. And I went for The Book Thief, which I read about 8 years ago. And I just thought it was an incredible book that I think anyone, regardless of age or interest, could pick up and read. So obviously the main premise of it is, or the way that the narrative tool is, that it's narrated by Death. And while that's not necessarily unique, he wasn't Marcus
Zusak,
yeah,
I think, yeah,
wasn't the first to do that. The way that he did it, I thought, was just amazing, as well as just the way that he writes is really beautiful. The way that Death sees things is really interesting, because you could think of Death as this sort of cold, callous narrator, but there's actually a lot of compassion in the undertones as well. And I think with Death sort of taking a sort of objective view of everything that's going on, it works really well, because it sort of shows the lack of humanity that humans can have, especially during times of war. So it's got that, but then it's also got these relationships with Hans and his wife Rosa, I think, adopting the young girl, and then taking the soldier in whose father actually saved Hans when he was a soldier in the war as well. And there's loads of things in it. The soldier that's brought in, Max, he writes this really beautiful short story for the young girl as well, but he actually, because materials are so sparse, it's whitewashed pages of Mein Kampf that he uses to write this story on. It's really poignant, that, like, to be where they are, and for him to take something so horrible that's the sort of the foundation of a lot of what's going on at that point, and then put something beautiful on it. It's just that's just a small part of the book, but it's just every page you're turning, it's one of those ones that for me, you just lose track of time when you're reading it.
Because I suppose it must be a difficulty, like I'd imagine anybody who's tackling or wanting to set a novel within the Second World War. I mean, there's been so many different books set, particularly in Nazi Germany. It must be quite difficult. But then obviously book burning was a big part of any totalitarian regime, but obviously the Nazis in the 30s. So the very fact that, as you mentioned, the fact that books play a role in that is obviously key to what he was trying to say.
Yeah. It's all about books, and it's so fitting that he writes so beautifully as well. And I think for the young girl, she steals her first book at her brother's funeral. I think it's a Gravedigger's book or something like that. And, that's at a point in her life where it's just totally swallowed by grief, and she finds this book, and Hans teaches her to read. And I think that's also another thing that's really beautiful about it is, it's trying to also highlight the power of books, through compassion as well. You've got this lovely old man, Hans, who's, his character in the book's just amazing. He's risking his life for people, and he's so kind and patient, and he's teaching this young girl to read. And, that's an escape for her in a time of war. And I think it also shows how life kind of does go on for a lot of people during war as well, and how powerful books can be and how life-changing they can be, because from there she keeps stealing books, but never more than what she needs. She's very methodical about how she does it, and really appreciates every book as well, and it's so important to her at a time that's really difficult in her life.
It's interesting, that's another one similar to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which was turned into a film. And
yeah.
Where do you stand on this? Could be a swift-ended podcast if you answer this wrongly, but where do you stand on, is the book better than the film or vice versa? Are you open-minded enough to take each one on their merits?
I try and separate each one and not think about them as connected, even though they are. It's strange going into a film where you've read the book. It's happened loads of times for me, and I just need to try and not measure them against each other. And
the reason I was asking is that one of my daughters read, it was a Jodi Picoult novel, and she loved it. She actually loved the novel, and then when they did the film of it, they changed the ending because they'd done these screen tests. And then they changed the ending, and absolutely, she was so annoyed about it. And I always want, particularly if you've got an investment in the book, if they don't follow it faithfully, does that irritate you?
Yeah, I think it would. I can't think off the top of my head, but that will definitely have happened with some books that I've read would have changed the films. But for me anyway, I think it's easier to have a stronger emotional attachment to a book than a film. Maybe that's just because you spend more time with the book. You've got more time for reflection, unless you sort of read it all in a oneer, but you kind of think about where you were in your life at that point reading that book. I think books are like music in that way, where I'll think of a book and I can remember where I was in life at that point, maybe where I was working or what I was thinking and feeling and stuff like that. So I think I'll always appreciate the books more, and I would never go in to a film of a book that I love thinking, I hope this lives up to it, because it couldn't possibly for me. I need to kind of try and think of it as something else, and if they do change the ending radically, then I would be quite annoyed. But other than that, I'll just kind of try and separate them completely as much as possible.
So given that, what did you think of The Book Thief?
The film was good, but I mean it's got nothing on the book for me. Yeah. But yeah, I can be a bit nervous sometimes going into the films, especially when you enjoy a book so much. And I remember leaving thinking, that was good. It was just, I think you're kind of glad if they don't mess it up in some ways as well. But no, the film I thought was really good as well. Especially is it Joffrey? I can't remember the actor's name that plays Hans. I thought he was perfect for the role as well. I think that's another important thing, casting in films, because in your mind, the characters you've spent so much time reading and imagining, and then sometimes when you see them on screen, if you feel in your own head that it's cast wrong, you can't really settle into the film. It's too jarring for you. So for like Johnny Depp and Fear and Loathing, I thought that was fine, that worked well. And the same for The Book Thief, the actor that plays Hans was just perfect for that character as well.
I'm sure everybody who's listening is certainly thinking of Tom Cruise as Jack Reacher. Slightly miscast, though I think the films are actually okay. are listening to the Read All About It podcast with me, Paul Cuddihy, and my guest in this episode, Tony Connelly, and we're on to book number 4, and this is a book that you couldn't be paid by me or anyone else to read again, and I'm slightly disappointed with your choice, but this is all about opinions, this game.
Yeah, so this book, again, coming back to the similarities between music and books, there's an emotional connection to them when you think about where you were when you read them. So for me, maybe this was just, as well as being some of the themes, maybe just reading it sort of early 20s, you know, there's nothing major going on in my life negatively, but just a bit sort of underlying, you know, discontent, unhappiness, maybe uncertainty about the future, so that might play into it. But anyway, the book choice is Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates, and I think it's, in terms of quality of the book, I'm not going to begin to fault it. It's a classic, and you know I can absolutely see why. It was well written, but I think...
So what age were you... Because I'm interested what age you were when you read it, because I read it in my 40s and I really enjoyed it. So I wonder if that...
I think I was about 23, 24. Yeah, I remember I was living in my own wee flat, so that would have been between 23, 26, something like that, in between there. So, yeah, I think, again, it's probably down to personally how I perceive it, but I struggled with Frank and his wife. Their relationship wasn't the healthiest, so that was something that, you know, as you're reading it, and obviously you can read books about, you know, negative subjects and completely be drawn into them and really enjoy reading them and see the quality of them, but I think their relationship, it wasn't enjoyable to read, and obviously you can tell Richard Yates is trying to show you a wider picture of how life can be in suburban America, and maybe again the sort of the troubles with trying to reach for that American dream and not coming quite close enough to it. And also just the sort of suburban discontent, you know, just they have dreams and ambitions to go to Paris, and you know, you can tell that it's never going to quite amount to that, and they're living in this neighbourhood where just everything's very sort of samey, and that was something I really didn't like. I grew up in East Kilbride, which is a great wee town, it's fine, but see, as a teenager, like for me anyway, and for a lot of other people I've spoken to that come from there, you just get a bit restless, you know, it's just, you see all the same faces that you knew from school, and okay, yeah, you get on with them, but you kind of feel like broadening your horizons, and that the thought of sort of staying in that fishbowl is something, especially when I read it in my early 20s, having just moved out to East Kilbride and got my own place in Glasgow, was something that I didn't want to really reflect on yet at that point, you know, and that's something that a lot of people strive for later in life, and that was completely at odds with me. That was something that I didn't want. I wanted to be in a city and amongst the hustle and bustle and be away from that sort of, you know, suburban dream. So they were striving for that. The relationship was unhealthy, and just as a character as well, Frank just seemed very sort of bitter and cold towards his wife as well. So that I think just a few things there that I could see the quality of the writing, but I didn't really enjoy the book, and it made me think about a lot of things in life that I didn't want to sort of have connected to me, I think.
Because before I read that, I read a book of short stories called 11 Kinds of Loneliness, which I think is better, I think, than Revolutionary Road, because they're much more concise, you know, not necessarily cheery stories, but they're actually, I think they're really brilliantly written.
Right.
So I came to that first.
Right.
So if you're ever looking for if you're ever going to tackle any more Richard Yates, I would recommend that.
Yeah, it's not going to put me off reading more of his, and he is such a highly regarded writer that I feel that I would need to return to him, especially because I have a sort of negative feeling towards that book, and that doesn't feel right given that he is such a great writer. So I think I would need to, and short stories is perfect, just to sort of dip into and then just actually see another side to his writing as well that I would enjoy more, I'm sure.
Because I always wonder, because I don't think he got the kind of acclaim or success when he was alive, so it must be like, for a lot of writers, it must be, obviously they don't know once they've gone, but the frustration of maybe not being recognised when you're actually doing the job.
I know that is scary, I think, in any art form, but writing as well, just to not see the appreciation for your work, and maybe to always have those unanswered questions of, well, was I good? Where would I stand? You know, I think ego comes into it for everyone to an extent, whether you're going to be like a sort of Hunter S. Thompson that's going to be more than his books, or if you want to just stay in the background and just have your books speak for themselves. I think you always want to maybe know where you stand amongst your peers or others, so to go unrecognised during your lifetime, it does seem quite heartbreaking.
It's a theme developing in your answers, because it's another one that was turned into a film. I think it was Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, and not a liner in sight being sunk.
Yeah, that was
or
them
terrible
uniting, actually, wasn't
songs.
it? Yeah. I've not seen the film for that, actually, but again, having not enjoyed the book, I'm not sure if I would, but both of them are great actors. I really like most of Leonardo DiCaprio's roles as well, so I heard it's a good film, but yeah, I didn't know that the two of them had, I think that's the only other time after Titanic that they had worked together, but no, I haven't seen the film in this instance.
And by the sounds of it, you're not in any rush to see it anytime soon.
Too many on my list to get through.
We are on to the fifth question, and that is either the book, the last book you read, or the book that you're currently reading.
Mm-hmm. I'm just coming to the end of it now, actually, and it's The Fight by Norman Mailer. I love boxing, so that's what drew me to it. I know of Norman Mailer, and he's one of those American writers like a sort of a Hemingway or Hunter Thompson that is very sort of famous, like maybe more so than you might get some of their sort of British counterparts, just some of the American writers that were like huge celebrities in their day as well. You know, Norman Mailer was like that, and I think that comes across in the book as well. You can tell that he's got an ego.
So he's basically, it's a kind of, I suppose it's reportage, isn't it? It's like him reporting on Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, the Rumble in the Jungle.
Yeah. So he's went out to Zaire to cover the fight, and he knows both fighters already, having covered them. I think it was boxing, baseball, and football. He loved like writing sports, so that comes across as well in the book. It's only towards the tail end. You've probably only about a tenth of the book, if that, is about the fight itself. A lot of it is in the build up to it, and that's really interesting to see the psyche of everything.
Because I was wondering, as a football writer who's you know, you're constantly interviewing, you know, footballers and other sportsmen for, you know, in different sports, but because there's a bit in the book, I think, where he goes in his early morning training runs with Muhammad Ali, and gets that level of access that nowadays that we could only dream of. Like, you can imagine a top sportsman saying to you, like, apart from the fact you probably beat them in the running, but I mean, it's incredible he gets that access. Yeah,
and I think he was very well liked by, I think, all the athletes knew of him because he was such a celebrity. I'm sure there's one part sort of early in the book where this might actually be his first meeting with Foreman. He knew Ali previously, but maybe not so much George Foreman, because I think someone asked, or he asked George Foreman, "Do you know who Norman Mailer is?" And his response is, "Oh yeah, you're the champ of writers." And that's Norman Mailer that's writing this. So again, it kind of, he chose to put that down on paper. It kind of speaks to his ego again, but he was very well respected, so that helped. And I think just with his celebrity, he obviously was good socially, you know, to rock up to Ali's villa and just sit outside and wait and go and speak to him, and then go on a run with him as well. Although before going on the run with Ali, he's talking about the concoction of drinks that he's putting down, and vodka and orange and stuff like that, so he wasn't putting himself in the best position. But having that access and that relationship to sports stars that's amazing, because that's always going to yield a better story, getting close to them. Whenever I interview any players, I don't want to have that sort of wall between us. You want to almost to be able to talk to them like a regular person, and that's very difficult to do because they're going to be sort of in media mode. But if you can, I'm always trying to break down those barriers, and just so that they can see you as a person that's maybe interested in something they're doing at that moment.
Is there anybody you've interviewed in the past, or as a sportsman, not necessarily a footballer, but a sports person, that you would like to do that kind of in-depth piece, which is longer than just an article, like a book?
Yeah, definitely. Within football, anyway, I think maybe some of the older players that have since retired, because they'll have a longer story to tell, and I think I've noticed with the older players, once they retire, they feel they can open up more, you can comment on things more, you can get a better story, you can hear about things that they might not wanted to have talked about in their career. You'll always get athletes withholding things, until after a certain point, whether it be after a certain game or a season, or until somebody's moved on or something like that. So I remember speaking to George Cadetti, and that was amazing because I was born in '87, so I was at the prime young age to be really excited to see him come to Celtic, and just, he was one of the players that was my hero when I was younger. So then revisiting that last year and getting to speak to him and see how his career unfolded, and obviously it had its downs as well, but he was just such a nice, likeable guy, and I could tell that once he'd moved beyond that point of playing, that he was ready to open up, and he was telling me loads of things about his life and what he was doing now, and there's so much there. It's somebody's life that they're telling you about, and it's all interesting. You could easily sit down and pen a book about that.
An interesting, Norman Mailer also had a reputation of dealing quite harshly with his critics, that it wasn't unknown for him to turn up in newspaper offices, find out who had said something harsh about his book, and do a bit of boxing on them as well.
Yeah, I heard about that. Was that the New York Times review? Yeah, I know. Yeah, I've since so this is the first Norman Mailer book that I've read, but just before reading that, I had heard about him as being a sort of celebrity writer, so he definitely had quite a bit of an ego about him as well, and that comes across in the book as well. But you can kind of look past that. Again, I don't mind that, especially if the quality of the writing is amazing, which it is. There's points in the book, especially about the action itself and the fight. The way that he writes about that is just so enthralling. I watch boxing regularly, and you're going through the pages just round by round, and it's just flying by, and it's really amazing the way that he describes the action. And there's one point in it this morning I was reading that stood out. So there's a line that says, "For so long as Foreman had strength, the ropes would prove about as safe as riding a unicycle on a parapet. Still, what is genius but the balance on the edge of the impossible?" And I just thought that was an amazing way to put down on paper just how frightening it must have been for Ali's corner to see him do this rope-a-dope up against somebody that could just knock down trees with a single punch. All the action is brilliant, but in the lead up to that as well, the majority of the book is just about him trying to get in the head of the fighters, which as a sports writer is something that you always really want to do. You want to kind of try and gently chip away at the armour and really see what's going on in their minds, and he does that brilliantly, and getting the access and just kind of analysing what they're saying and what it might mean.
I was just in the course of this, well, luckily it's just an audio podcast so nobody can see the fact I was just googling away there while we were talking, but in The Naked and the Dead by Norman Mailer is another book that I read. It was partly based on his kind of wartime experiences in the Second World War. But if you're going to read anything else, I would recommend that.
That's good, right? Yeah, I think I will actually, because I have really enjoyed this. The way he writes is really beautiful, and you're flying through the book, just drawn into it. So I definitely need to read more of his stuff. I do make a conscious effort for that when I'm reading a book to seek out more work by that author, because it'd be a shame not to. I'll read some books that you'll enjoy, and then there'll be others where I want to read everything the author's done. I think you and I recently have been talking about Don Winslow, and I've read a bunch of his books, and I'm looking forward to reading more of them. And you kind of build up that trust with an author that it's even maybe more so than music. You just know whatever they're going to put out, you're more than likely going to really enjoy it.
And you mentioned you've just about finished that. Are you someone who knows what you're going to read next? Do you have a pile of books to read, or do you just start afresh and think, right, what mood am I in to read?
I've always got 3 or 4 that I know that I'm going to get on to next, because I need to stop myself buying books and adding to the bookshelf, because inevitably it'll get beyond 5 or 6 and I'll forget one of them, and it might be like a couple of years later. So I've got a few to read next. I think the next one I'm going to go back onto fiction. I just got it the other day. It's November Road. Can't remember the author, but it was recommended to me by my dad, who also likes Don Winslow, so that sort of crime thriller writer. So he recommended this to me, and I bought it the other day, so I'm going to start that tomorrow, and it comes really highly recommended, so I'm looking forward to reading that.
Excellent. Well, listen, for now, that's us come to the end of the Read All About It podcast, but thanks very much, Tony, for being our guest this time.
Thanks for having me, really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Read All About It podcast, and I'd love to hear what you thought about it. You can get in touch via Twitter at ReadAllAbout20, on Instagram at ReadAllAboutItPodcast, or you can send an email to readallaboutit@paulcuddihy.com. If you've enjoyed the podcast, subscribe, leave a review and spread the word. If you haven't enjoyed it, say nothing to anybody. But I do hope you can join me, Paul Cuddihy, next time on the Read All About It podcast. And in the meantime, keep reading.